Hello and welcome. Today is a very exciting episode. We're going to be checking out J.S. Bach's Partita 3. We're going to be specifically checking out a third movement here, and what we're going to be checking out is the harmony, the chords he's using, the melody, and more. So let's get into it. First, I have an actual recording here on Musescore. I rescored the piece, so let's listen to it. Okay, so as you can hear, it's just a marvelous piece. It is so nice sounding, and it does repeat. You see that repeat sign right there, but we're just going to look at this section here so you get the point of it. So let's get into analyzing the score now. Okay, so here we are looking at the score, and before I start anything, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to get rid of the name, and I'm going to get rid of the trill. It's going to get a little bit in the way of what I'm doing here. Okay, so now let's start analyzing the piece, but before we start, let's look at one thing, and that's the fact that if you look at the corner, the very left-hand corner next to the treble clef, so those four sharps there are F, C, G, and D, and what those are doing is those are telling us we are in the key of E major, or we could be in the key of B minor, but I'll assure you that this piece that we're analyzing right now is in the key of E major for this section that we're going to be looking at. Okay, so now that we know it's an E major, and now that we know that we have the notes F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and D sharp, that's going to help us throughout this, because we have to know that those notes are in the key. Your other notes that are in the scale are just going to be your E natural, your A natural, and your B natural. Okay, so let's look at the whole scale of E major. So you have an E natural, F sharp, G sharp, A natural, B natural, C sharp, D sharp, and then you're back again at E natural. Okay, so now let's get into analyzing the score. Okay, we can see right off in the first measure we start off with an E and a B, and then we go up to a G sharp. Okay, so that looks like it's representing the tonic chord because we have that E and that B, which is basically representing an E chord. You don't have the third, so when you don't have the third of a chord, you don't know if it's minor or if it's major. Since we're in the key of E major and we're starting on what's basically an E chord, then in the key it would be an E major with that G sharp, so it's kind of hinting at that. But then the next note is that G sharp. It's just an octave up compared to where it would be here, where we have that E B, and that G sharp would fit right here. But instead we have that E B and then that G. So if we just have that G by itself, that's not really saying a whole lot. But if we have that E and that B, and then we have that G, okay, then we're hearing basically an E major chord, but it's spread out horizontally. So it's good to know that chords are not always stacked vertically, in other words, like where they're just stacked all in time right now. Sometimes a chord can be actually represented horizontally throughout time to where you'll hear this note, and then this note, and then this note, and that's representing that E major chord, but it's not happening all at once. Okay, so now we have measure 1 finished, and this is how I'm going to label it. So I have E/B, so it's showing us we have that kind of like a chord of E and B, and then I have it labeled 1 and 5, which is in relationship to right here, I have that underlined 1. So this underlined 1 in the beginning of the measure is going to tell us that this is the 1 chord of E major, so this is the tonic. Okay, so now we can see that the G sharp is carrying on into measure 2. So at the end of measure 1, we have that G sharp. In the beginning of measure 2, we again have that G sharp, but then there's that A natural underneath it. So that A and G sharp. So from that A and that G sharp, there's this little melody here, and it has a nice shape to it. So it goes from that G sharp to an F sharp, and then an E, using eighth notes, goes back up to that F sharp, and then it leaps up a third to A. Interesting, but that has all the components of highlighting chord 4 in that measure. So again, this is the 4 of E major, so in other words, the chord built off the 4th note in E major. So in the context of that, we would have a 1 and a 7 here with that A and that G sharp. That would be the 1 and the 7th of the chord. Then from there, an F would be a 6, an E would be a 5. You go back up to the F, 6, and then you go to the A, which would be, again, at the 1. So something cool happens. Not only does the melody have that nice shape, But more so than that, voices 1 and 2 nicely merge together. Okay, so let's look back at measure 1 here, and we can see that we can clearly see a voice 1 here, and we can see a voice 2 down here. And you can see that voice 1 does its nice little leap. So let's actually draw it. It does a nice leap up here, and then it is right there. It has oblique motion, and then it goes stepwise motion down, and then it goes back up, and then it does a little leap right here. Okay? Now let's look at voice 2. So voice 2's down here, and then in voice 2 it looks like it leaps right here, and then as you can see it looks like it joins in voice 1 and merges just like that. So you can see the two voices nicely merging together. You can see it and you can hear it merging together nicely. Okay, so then on to the next measure, we can see that the A stays here, and then it goes down to a B using contrary motion. Okay, so I'm not really going to be drawing like that anymore because things are going to get messy. Okay, so in the next measure we have a B and we have an A, and then from there the A actually goes up one note, which is again a B, and then from B, this is interesting, it does a B, G sharp, A, and F, and you'll see why I find this interesting in a little bit. This makes a cool little jingle, so let's listen to it. Okay, so that measure right there has the components spelling out a 5 chord in E major. So looking at a B major chord, that B and that A would be the 1 and the 7, and then that little jingle there, that B would be the 1, the G sharp would be the 6, the A would be the 7, and the F sharp would be the 5. Okay, so one interesting note here is this B and the G sharp kind of gives us a taste of chord 3 with the relationship of the G sharp to the B. In the next measure you can see we just continue, we do a B, F sharp, G, A, and then we go back down to an F sharp, go back up to a G, and then an E. Okay, so now looking at the next measure, we can see that we start on a B down here, we go up to an F sharp, and then a G, and then an A, just like that, and we go back down to the F. So that right there still looks like chord 5. We have the 1, 5, 6, and 7 of the chord. Furthermore, we're starting on the 1 of the chord with that B, and then we're ending on the 5 of the chord with that F sharp. So to me that's still looking like chord 5, but if we look at the next measure, we see something interesting. So we have a G sharp, and then we have an E, F sharp, and then a D sharp. And first of all, I don't know if you hear something familiar with that. So I'm going to talk about it in a second, but first let's look at the context here. So we were in that 5 chord, we're in that B major. So if we look at the context of B major, we have a G sharp, E, F sharp, and D sharp. Then that doesn't really fit in a B major chord very well at all. But remember what I was saying earlier about how this B down to this G sharp is kind of hinting the 3 chord with that G sharp to that B. Okay, so here we are back on G, and we're doing the same thing as before with that 1, 6, 7, 5 jingle, but we're just doing it down here. Versus before it was a little higher, it was up here. So everything's the same as before, it's just shifted down a third. And when you think about it being the same thing but down a third, it makes sense that this would be the 3rd chord, and then at the same time we're starting on that G sharp and we're ending on that D sharp, and we also have the 7th of the chord in there. But if we take that same principle from the first jingle and apply it to the second jingle, we have the fact that our G sharp to our E is hinting at the 1 chord. And in the next measure, you can plainly see spelt out an E major chord. You have an E, B, G sharp, back down to another E. And then after that from E, you're literally going up E, G sharp, and B, plainly spelling out an E major chord. And then from there, you're going back up to E again, and then to G, which is preparing us for the next measure. But before that, this is very clearly spelling out an E major chord. You literally, in the beginning, have 1, 5, 3, 1. You have an E major chord backwards, and then from that 1, you have a 1, 3, 5 again, E major chord forwards, and then you're going back up a 1 and a 3, which again is preparing us for this next measure, measure 5. Okay, so from this last note, G sharp in measure 4, we're now going down to measure 5 on the note A, but we're not using this A, we're going down an octave to this A. And then from A, we're actually going back up to that G sharp, and then we're going down to F, and then E, Then from that E it goes up nicely, it goes E, F, G, A. Then from that A it leaps down a third to F sharp. So that would spell out the fourth chord in E major, or in other words, an A major 7 chord. And you can probably see now that we have a chord progression going on. So you can see we start on a 1, 4, and a 5, and then we have a 1 and a 4 again. We did kind of have that little bit of the 3 in there, which makes sense, which was what was going on there. But we still have a sort of basic chord progression of what looks like a 1, 4, 5, and 1. And sure enough, in the next measure, we have a B and an A, which in chord 5 would be the 1 and a 7. And then after that, we have an E and a B, which would be a 1 and a 5 of chord 1. And now this might look familiar, because you have that E and that B down here, but then you have that G sharp up here, which is the same exact thing as the first measure. So again, we have that E and that B, and what's missing from that's that G sharp, and that G sharp is found in the next note, it's just an octave up. After this, we have an A and a C sharp, which would be the 1 and the 3 of the fourth chord of E major, or in other words, an A major chord. Then our next note, we have an F sharp up here, and then after that, we have a B and an F sharp down here, and then after that, we have a D sharp up here. Okay, so let's talk about this. Okay, so we have the F sharp, which is the 5th of a B major chord, and then in the middle, which I'm going to look at as kind of like the center of what's going on here. So we have that F sharp, and then in the middle we have a B and the F sharp, and then after that we have a D sharp. And what's interesting is this D sharp is the exact note that's missing from our B major chord, the note right before this. And the reason why I'm talking about this so much is because this is preparing for what happens in the last measure. Okay, so now let's move on to the next measure, but I just kind of want to lead up to it. So leading up to it, we had an F sharp up here, we had a B and an F sharp down here, and then we had a D sharp, and this D sharp is leading us to the next measure where we're just going up one semitone to E, which is our tonic note, which is like the foundational note of the entire phrase that we're analyzing here. So we have this lead tone because D sharp is one semitone away from E. E is the first note in the scale, and D sharp is the last note in the scale. So this is our leading tone. And you could look at this as this is what's going on in the upper voice. So in the upper voice, we have that resolution of going from the 7th of the chord to the 1 of the chord, which is a nice resolution. So not only do we finish on an E up here, but if you look, we have an E down here as well. So we have a unison of E and E. So you just have the tonic note being played together. So very strong resolution, but it's even stronger when you look at this. Okay, so now this is more important, so we're just going to look all at the score. All of our focus is going to be in. So we're looking at the fact that from this 4 chord, then we have this F sharp, which I've been highlighting a lot. We have this F sharp, then we go down to that B and the F sharp down here. Okay, so this is allowing us to do 2 things here. Okay, because what it's allowing us to do is it's allowing us to have function with this B and this F sharp down here, but it's also allowing this D sharp to leap up here. And what this is doing is this is allowing the use of 2 voices using 1 chord. So we're using the 5 chord here, and we have an upper voice of an F and a D, and then it goes to an E. Okay? So what you're seeing here is the last step of the upper voice is going from that lead tone to that 1, which I've already highlighted, but the fact is that the F sharp then goes down to that B and the F sharp, the note right after here. So because the B chord, the first note of the chord is that B, and this B is able to resolve up a 4th to the tonic of the chord in E. And what that's doing is we have a 5 to a 1 that's giving us a perfect cadence, a 5-to-1 resolution, one of the strongest resolutions that you can have in a song that tells the song that it's over. Not only that, but we also have the leading tone up here, which is also going up to the tonic of the chord. And this is really interesting because this is allowing 1 chord to be able to split up into 2 different voices and give a strong resolution of a 5-to-1 on the bottom and then a 7-to-1 on the top. So that's it for this video. I find this really interesting to analyze a score like this. As you can see, for Bach, this could be looked at as a pretty simple little section here compared to a lot of his other stuff that you might get into. But this is a really good example of seeing a solid chord progression in a score for one, and then also secondly, being able to pull out a lot of information out of what's going out here and understand what's going on here more. And this can really help when you want to come up with ideas, appreciate a score more, or just understand this stuff. Just listening to this or doing this yourself, you can learn a whole lot. And you can learn, okay, why is someone putting, like in this last two measures here, why do we have an F sharp way up here and then we have a B and F down here? We have a D sharp up here, like what's the reasoning of that? And then you look at the very last note and you go, oh wow, it's because it's allowing that 7-1 here and that 5-1 here, because it's using the 1 of the chord, which it's a 5 chord, and then it's using the third of the chord, which is the third of a dominant chord is the leading tone. So it's using the tonic of the 5 chord and the third to resolve to the same note. That's just awesome. Very clever, but not only that, it has a really nice sound. So, hey, it's the end of the video. Let's listen to it one more time now that we analyzed it. Okay, so there we are. We've analyzed the score. It's a good learning experience. It's very insightful, and we can see here that actually a simple chord progression and not a crazy amount of complexity can make something sound very beautiful. And sometimes when analyzing a score, you can realize that some of the most simple ideas can sound so beautiful. And I'm not saying like this is the most simple idea here, but compared to a lot of other stuff by Bach, this is not like something too crazy here. And actually this is a great example of getting into analyzing a score. So if you have any ideas for maybe some scores that you want me to check out or analyze, that would be like a great challenge. So leave some ideas in the comments. And until next time, have a good one.